So as we get rid of the doctrine of discovery, and as we get rid of the doctrine that this was the land of no one, we then have to begin to come to terms with the price of the encounter. The encounter was not pretty. The arrival of Europeans was not pretty for a number of reasons. The first was the encounter of two immune systems. There are now estimates of what the population of Canada was, or the land that is Canada. It's fair to say that over the next 250 years after the encounter became more serious, it's estimated that as many as 90% of the indigenous population died. They died as a result of disease. They died as a result of the incompatibility between two immune systems, between two peoples who had never interacted before in human history. And the consequence of that interaction was absolutely catastrophic. Catastrophic in all of the Americas. All of the Americas. This was the first great catastrophe, and it was the catastrophe of disease. And even in the residential school experience, there were still people wrestling with disease, with tuberculosis, with illnesses which they had contracted by virtue of contact with people who were carrying with them diseases that had never been encountered in the Americas before. The second was the catastrophe of conquest and the view that the Europeans brought with them that somehow they were on a mission. They were on a mission to, quote, civilize. They were on a mission to assimilate. They were on a mission to convert. They brought with them their theology, which stated that those who did not embrace their theology were bound to damnation and needed to be converted. They brought with them a sense of their superiority as a culture. They brought with them all of the attitudes of conquest, which by the time the 19th century came along, were even given the false coverage of science. And much of anthropological and sociological and biological thinking in the 19th century was based on the premise that there are races which are superior and there are races that are inferior. And the Aboriginal cultures were necessarily inferior. And that view was widespread, deeply seated in the European culture of those days. We need to understand what that did as well as what disease did. Because we can only understand the residential school experience as part of what I call the evil trinity of 19th century policy in this country, of Victorian policy. The Indian Act, the numbered treaties, which I'll come to, and the residential schools. They all went together. And the premise at that time was that because the experience had been that Indigenous people were such a small portion of the population compared to what they had been before, a common assumption of 19th century Victorian Canada was that the Indigenous people would simply disappear. And in the case of the Beothuk people of Newfoundland, they were right, they did disappear. They were killed off, they died. If you go to the museum in St. John's, you can see the diary and the pictures of the woman who was the last surviving Beothuk woman. And that assumption was widespread.